Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Labours of Sports Coaching with myself, Mark Carroll. Again, welcome along to a new episode. In today's episode, I am going to do a bit of a deep dive into one half of a narrative I've been peddling for quite a long while, actually, but I suppose more recently on the show, about what we need to be aware of and what we need to kind of tackle and meet head on with regards to influences on our behaviour as coaches in order to actually reach a space where, we start to act in a way that is intentional and is, what we can be proud of. And in previous episodes, if you look particularly, episodes like the information fallacy and coach behaviour, or even blog posts that I've been writing around that, you'll hear me mentioning about we need to understand where change has to come from within us, in terms of coach-related factors for behaviour, and then where change has to come outside of ourselves in terms of looking at our surrounding environment. I'm going to park, not fully park, it will inevitably come in because you can't change yourself without also recognising the influence that the environment has on yourself, and vice versa. But I am going to try and park some of the more environmental stuff, or at least turn the volume a little bit down more on the external environmental stuff where I can, in order to do a bit of a deep dive into more recognising the you part of behaviour. And I think it's fairly obvious, and I think most of us are aware that we don't coach in a vacuum. Okay, so there's not like it's not like the that Apple TV show Severance, for example, where people can literally detach their work mind from their home life. And we bring all of ourselves to every training session we do as coaches. We bring all of ourselves to every competition that we attend with our athletes. And ourself isn't just the present moment either. When I say all of ourselves, it's the past, it's the present, and they collide together to create what we do now and how we operate in the future unless we do something about it. We kind of are aware of that, but I don't know if we fully ever reflect as coaches on what the various strands of ourself can be, and how that creates an effect on our environment. Now, obviously, I study specifically the coach creating motivational environment, so I'm going to reference those sorts of dimensions of coach behaviour and some of the effects that, motivationally speaking. So I just want you to kind of think a little bit about this and try and reflect on yourself as we kind of talk through some of the various sort of subtopics that are going to come out of this. Well, I've got you. Again, if you're a new listener to the show, welcome, and please subscribe. And again, if you're already a continuing listener, then again, good to see you again. And please continue to share the show wherever you can. I'm not currently on LinkedIn at the moment. Taking a wee bit of a break from LinkedIn at the moment. I'm just getting a wee bit tired of dancing for the algorithm. Maybe I might pop back up there. Who knows? But it's just in case you haven't maybe seen episodes shown or anything like that. Oh, if you found this episode, then well done. That shows that you have, I suppose. But I will continue to post episodes and stuff like that. I just won't necessarily be active on the social media. Similarly speaking, is still a thing. It'll come back very, very soon. And again, the link to join the newsletter is there, and I'll be catching up very shortly on some of the newest research that's coming out in this space, and also doing a bit more of a deep dive as well into some of my own sort of commentary in this area too, and some own work that I'm working on at the present moment. Doing a lot of stuff just with manuscript writing at the moment. Pretty excited actually, just in terms of looking at parent coach influences on behaviour, and really sort of bringing out that piece alive through some sort of creative non-fiction and some composite vignettes, which has been really interesting to play about with, and it's quite powerful actually. So it's just another space to watch. But yeah, well, enough about that. So we'll get back into the episodes. So I think the best way to sort of position this is, let's compartmentalize the self here as much as is appropriate. Okay, when I talk about the present you and the past you, I think we could break that down into let's focus on the past first. Okay, so you have the biographical you, and I might even say the genetic you. Comes alongside the situational or even the contextual you. Okay, in terms of how we can kind of frame the past and the present versions of ourselves that collide together, respectively speaking, and that therefore sort of guides and directs what we do and how we act around our athletes. So let's focus on the biographical or genetic you, biographical and genetic you. Okay, an easy catch-all term here, and maybe I should have led with this, but I just think that's a nice way of sort of divvying it up already, is personality. Okay, so let's think about personality. Personality is obviously made up in combination of genetic dispositions and environmental influences on who we are. We might call this the sort of trait based coach behaviour. So if we kind of look at genetic disposition, that we would often frame these as being relatively stable elements of who we are. We are born with certain disposition. We are born with certain propensity towards types of action. We aren't I don't know why I use this term, but when I'm speaking to students, we're not just like complete wee potatoes that pop out the earth and and we do stuff with it. I don't even know where the potato reference comes from. I just tend to use that. So we do have genes that are given to us, and that can affect how we are. Not always in a global sense, and that we are one way because we have a certain trait that means we're that way in all situations. There are contextual triggers to the way we act. But when we think about personality, maybe the obvious sort of big five personality characteristics you might, or traits rather, openness, anxiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. These sorts of things you might have heard before. I'm not going to, truthfully speaking, I'm not going to. There's better people to listen to that will talk about each of those ones, for example, and personality theory better than me. This isn't so much what I'm bringing it up for, but just to kind of help us be aware of the impact of that. One example of this, and let's stick more to personality, the genetic disposition front, that I can bring into to our awareness around the motivational literature. That's actually really interestingly looked at the influence of personality factors on motivational coach behavior. There was a fantastic article by, actually a collection of articles by Matosic and colleagues across. There was a 2017 piece and also a 2020 piece, and it actually looked at the relationship between narcissism as a personality disorder. And that will come back to the word disorder perhaps momentarily, but looking at narcissistic traits and how they were evident and had a relationship with a controlling interpersonal coaching style, which kind of figures, doesn't it, in a way, because if we go back to, and again, you'll often hear me talk about controlling coaching in more nuanced ways than this, but at the extreme end of the spectrum of controlling behaviour, which is fairly manipulative, fairly coercive, fairly coach centered, that has a lot of comparison and parallel with narcissists. Who often gravitate to leadership roles, and that's fairly commonly found. Coaching being one such leadership role, but who also, I suppose, through their sort of self-aggrandizement and that self-worship and expecting the environment should shape to meet their needs and their interests, would naturally direct the environment in such a way that isn't necessarily inclusive of other people's perspective, other wishes and such. So athletes may become more like pawns that a coach should move about. Coaches that have that sort of personality trait or disorder, they are really maybe more disposed to tendencies that would align with that. So, and it's a great paper, a collection of papers, I say, that you can look at, but that's just one example of that. However, just keep a slight pin on that as well, because I did mention already that personality, at least in the way I'm going to chat to you about today, is that blend of genetic disposition, and when I say relative stability within that, I mean across the lifespan, and environmental influence. Now, we might think about environmental influence as being like socialization, as when we grow up, we're made to believe things, we're made to understand the world in certain ways based on our interaction with it. But within a society, within cultures, we have life experiences that sort of frame who we are, and often quite ingrained effects on us that certainly, particularly in our youngest years, are fundamental often and very deterministic for later life outcomes, but as a mechanism within that, or behaviour within life. I mean, there was a previous episode, not necessarily looking at the coach, but with Andrew Kirtland, where we looked at a salutogenic approach to talent development. That was sort of understanding the life course, and I would maybe second that and actually move that towards understanding the life course of a coach. We talked about, coaches more often than not were athletes back in the day. We go through that sort of apprenticeship of learning. I would take myself as an example of that. As a player, I didn't always feel the most closely connected to coaches. Didn't, to be honest, feel the most closely connected to teammates in specific environments. Not when I was playing with my friends in boys' club, but within academies. Perhaps because there was a lot of pressure attached to these sorts of environments. That, there was some situational triggers that maybe for my own introversion, to be honest, those sorts of things. I think I became more aware of through time, but that has had a lasting impact on me as a coach now, because I am someone who puts a lot of emphasis around the need for relatedness and the need for cultivating a sense of belonging with those that are under my charge. So that is something that I carry with me. It's not, maybe if it's not something I'm always conscious of in every single moment, it certainly sits within quite a deep of my mind, and I think that is it's illustrative, and I think in a lot of the ways that I act. Likewise, I have a socialization within academia, because I'm someone who, in their own specific coach education journey, went through higher education and and has been embedded in higher education for a long time. So I think about coaching through psychology, through frameworks, those mental models that have become fairly encoded in how I behave. Now you might contrast that. Maybe you're similar to myself, but maybe you're different. Maybe you've learned coaching in the trenches, and you've learned coaching through a lot of informal learning theories. Theories you've developed within practice. So again, that is going to impact how you think about coaching, the values that you have within coaching, and your tendencies within coaching. So that, and you could imagine, and I'm not necessarily trying to. This is somewhat speculative, because again, I don't think that the authors necessarily were looking at this. But if I return to Matosic's paper, and we could speculate around, well, narcissism, maybe there is a genetic disposition within that, but that was probably that may have remained as potential only for narcissistic behaviour until cultivated further through social experiences that someone could have, who then through time has then developed that sort of disorder, and that is then carried them into coaching. So again, you could see the interaction here between the genetic disposition and the environmental influence, how they interact with one another to create a personality that has been carried into coaching and has an influence on our behaviours as coaches. So if we understand that, then what are the implications of personality, and how do we actually move forward with it? My advice here is sort of two-pronged, I suppose. A lot of the stuff I'm going to say is two-pronged. We need to be very active, not just in reflection, but in reflexive thought, to consider your own sort of socialization. So not just saying, to dig deeper than just, I do this because of this, but why do I do this because of this? And understanding the self in that, and understanding the self from what your traits are, but also where there has been a social influence in the way that you've come to think. Some great episodes that are already on the show that, just last week, actually, we might have a conversation with Mark Parkington, and where we speak a little bit about the reflexive element within coaching philosophy. I would definitely just recommend tuning into that. There was actually a very old episode in the show that I think might have been one of certainly within the first 10 episodes that I've done, where I talk about reflexive practice as the sort of superpower behind reflective practice. So again, give that a little look. So does that need to be reflexive, okay, to really understand these things? That does, to be honest, branch over into also to considering the sort of emotionality of coaching as an antecedent itself, and we're going to come on to talking about it, obviously, but I just think it's a nice sort of opportunity to discuss that again. The other aspect around how you manage, I've kind of said it in it, about the implications of understanding the influence of personality on coaching behaviour, is actually about, well, try not to attempt to change things about yourself that in some ways can't be changed. I've had previous conversations on the show around my belief that sometimes the best response, the best way for growth is about behavioral management and not, or behavioral control, and not necessarily behavior change. Because when we consider certain things around personality, particularly the trait-based dynamics of personality that have a genetic disposition to it, we have to accept sometimes that we're always going to be vulnerable to that. And sometimes the best thing we can do in these scenarios is start to understand the nature of our own beast in some ways. So as a form of monitoring, as a form of starting to recognise the contextual triggers to that. Because as I say, even if you might be a coach that's prone to being fairly disagreeable in certain elements of that, then again, you might recognise that isn't so much a problem insofar as how you manage or work with with athletes, or even work with other coaches who you have a particular type of relationship with that's fairly seen as collaborative, or it's an established relationship. If you know that you're prone to being disagreeable, maybe in the short term, maybe when you're having a new relationship with an athlete or a new relationship with another coach, then again, that's something that through awareness of that, you can maybe set out a plan for managing that process that again is intentional and conscious, but is working with who you are and not trying to pretend to yourself that you can be this whole other person. So I think that that is quite important, and I have done a previous episode not long ago on that. As I say, the title, it was fairly recent. I think it was "Don't Control Behaviour." No, don't change behaviour. Let's control it, or don't change behaviour. Let's manage it. It's one of those two. You'll need to forgive me, but fairly recent. So I would go back and have a look at that, or I delve into that further. And I think that's really important, both insofar as avoiding frustration and disillusionment. When you're really conscientious as a coach and you really want to be better and you're trying to get better, but you just are hitting your head against the wall, maybe there's a point when we start to understand the personal influences on behaviour that we need to just start to learn how to work with ourselves and not trying to constantly reinvent ourselves. I think there is something to that. And then also is a need to stay and remain authentic, because our most authentic self is oftentimes our most effective self. So, and again, it's a conversation that I've had in that previous episode again, so I would go back and look at it, but we don't have time today necessarily to touch on that further than that, but just to understand that being who you are authentically is going to be instrumental to being the best version that you can be for your athletes and the most relatable version that you can be for your athletes, and start to maybe understand how authenticity maybe meets with other relational goals that you have in your coaching, and therefore, you know, as part of forming a better relationship with them, being truer to yourself and truer to your personality with all its rough edges is again maybe the best protocol. So again, there's an epiphany that can come out of understanding personality influences, the you part of you, the biographical part of you, the genetic part of you that comes with you to every training session, to every practice. Okay, so that's that part. Okay, and again, I'm signaling to myself as if I'm pushing it over here, as if we're going to leave it in there. We'll put it to the side momentarily, but we are going to bring it back out because, as I say, that these things are always interacting with one another. So, but let's think now a little bit about we might call this the state-based coach behavior. So we spoke a little bit about trait-based coach behavior. Let's think about state-based coach behavior. Okay, is another artifact of you that we see in our behaviours and the things we're proud of, and maybe the things we aren't so proud of as well, that we're trying to work on. State is in the present moment. Okay, and this is coming back into the sort of situational and contextual influences on you, and how that affects your behaviour. I think we could separate this, at least the way that makes best sense for me to talk about it anyway, is by let's talk about emotions and then let's talk about motivation. Emotions are reactive behaviors, insofar as like as a result of maybe anxiety or worry or anger, happiness or joy. So I mean, like I can give loads of examples here, and you'll have your own examples hopefully bubbling up in your head. But I know that when I've been nervous, maybe I'm trying to impress other people, and notice there is already now an interaction, particularly with state-based stuff with the immediate environment, that, you know, I have a tendency to really want to try and control more things. So I might be less open to being autonomous supportive, or perhaps actually, if I'm able to if I have a lot of control over how I behave, insofar as at least if I have a fairly broad coaching toolkit, then my emotional state could dictate what I choose from within that toolkit. Because even if I'm trying to impress other people, for example, because there's an anxiety about impression management, if I have it within my arsenal to be actually more autonomy supportive, and I see that almost micro politically as being something the environment values, and so far as how I can obtain capital as a result of my behaviour, and these are the sort of things that are bubbled up and created emotion, and then therefore as my behaviours came out of the emotion, then you can start to see how I would maybe perhaps act in a particular way. Okay, I know for sure as well that if I'm feeling fairly happy and relaxed, that I'm more easygoing as a coach, that I'd be more happy with like jokes and sessions and having fun and all that sort of stuff. And it's important to recognise that I have sort of touched on it already, but just to shine, let's just go into this a bit deeper about how the fact that our emotions don't happen in a vacuum. Our emotions, we have emotions through interacting with the world. Coaching's full of it, and there's emotions that that we can trace at their source to events within coaching. That might be, is my team winning or losing? Are my players behaving well or not? Is the referee giving a decision I'm happy with or not happy with? To actually events that are happening outside of coaching, but nonetheless follow us into coaching. So you've had a really hard day at work, you've had an argument with family or friends that can, not saying it will, but it can, if you allow it to, carry with you into coaching. Okay, and all of a sudden you're tense because you just had a hard meeting at work or something's happened that day that's disappointing. So you've got a bit of melancholy and you're a bit sad. And again, that is going to have an influence on how you carry yourself and how you behave potentially. So and we can't necessarily get away from that. It's innate to coaching. And there's a great article actually about the emotionality of coaching by Track, Smith and Nelson in 2017 that they talk about just these various strands of being and how the world can impact us in that way. So that's one part of it. So and then I would then also bring into the mix motivation. We understand from a sort of self-determination theory lens that the extent to which the environment satisfies our needs for autonomy, competence, relatedness, that impacts the extent to which we carry a more internalized vision and view of why we're in that environment. Therefore, our motivations are more adaptive as a result, because typically we'll find that more internal drivers of behavior rather than more external, extrinsic reasons for coaching, whether that be just for to avoid being fired, or to because we feel a sense of guilt towards our athletes or for our coaching colleagues, those sorts of things, that can carry with it a higher propensity in situation A, where we're having more internal drivers, to act in a more autonomous, supportive way, in a way that, and coaches have been found to do this. A lot of articles by Stebbins and colleagues, or Rocky and colleagues have noticed that where the coaching context is supportive of coaches' motivation, and coaches carry with that more internal drivers for coaching, that they are shown to behave in a more autonomous, supportive, less controlling way, in a way that's offers more potential to satisfy their athletes' needs. In a reciprocal cycle almost, that will also bounce back on a coach as well. I'm not going to go into that too much because, as I promised at the start of the episode, I want us to still focus where we're going to reference the impact on the outside of us as coaches on ourselves. I want to really still focus on ourselves and that a little bit more deeply, or at least create that as the salient factor for now. So we could see those things occurring, and obviously as well, your motivations, if you have more controlled motivations for being there, that can also carry implications for the emotions that you have when you are in your space as well. If job security is a concern in coaching, okay, you're going to have anxiety when you coach. When you have anxiety when you coach and you feel that, and that is the state that you're in when you coach, that is going to perhaps be an influence on why you might behave in a more controlling manner, in a manner that's maybe not adaptive, or those sorts of things. Equally, we think about complacent behaviour, just complacent coach behaviour. I'm not trying to signal here for the organisation, but I'm just trying to make sense that coaches who maybe don't feel pressure, overly don't feel pressure, sometimes can also then act in an easygoing way that maybe sometimes bring out the best in them, but also might bring out complacency. I'm just I'm speculating here, but it's just you get the drift. So think about your own emotions and think about your own motivations, and can you trace that into the way you feel and how you think and how you behave. Now, implications of this and how you can move forward, thinking about the situational, contextual, trait based you. Well, something that's helped me, and it's not something that's discussed a lot, to be honest. I did actually have a conversation with Adam Nichols on the podcast recently as a psychologist, and we were talking about actually the space for mental skills training to come into to be part of the coach's arsenal, the coach's toolkit. I've used it a lot, and it's been really, really helpful for me just to think about imagery. So if I know that I can be a bit hot-headed, for example, when X occurs, when something goes wrong, when maybe there's a disturbance and my plan isn't completely being executed how I intended it. If I was just driving to that session and I'm actually imagining that thing occurring and imagining myself reacting in a way that I would like, that's more controlled, where I've actually been thinking through contingencies, and I'm visualizing these things playing out, I feel far more prepared, and certainly anecdotally, I have been more prepared to deal with it when such an event occurs. Similarly speaking, I'm someone who can feel a lack of confidence at points, but also over time has come to really cultivate quite a deep sense of self belief, and that is 100% came from just being my own hype man. From that sort of positive self talk on the way to coaching, on the way back from coaching, particularly where there's certain coaching sessions we bounce out of and just feel like this was amazing. I could do this all day, every day. And there's certain coaching sessions that we bounce out of where things were a bit negative, things didn't really go correct, and you need to salvage your confidence from those sorts of nights, and you need to rationalize. And that's another strand of this sort of self-talk, is about rational talk. And I think part of being an emotionally intelligent coach is about rationalizing that you're going to have bad sessions, you're going to have good sessions, that it's not the end of the world, that it's all learning, that you kind of win what you learn. And that's another thing, growth mindset, how these things can play into how you manage your emotions, how you manage your motivations for plugging into practice every day, or every week, and doing that for months and years on end as you try to develop that expertise and that knowledge, and see that hopefully we'll see the fruits of that labour. Really starting to recognize yourself as a performer, and take an interest in how psychology can help you as a coach, and mental skills is an obvious way of how it can help you as a coach, is a really strong bit of advice that has a lot of personal meaning for me, and perhaps could come to form a big part of your own coaching toolkit, because emotional intelligence is about self control as well as how you work with other people, and we can come back to that another day about the other people part. Um, as far as how you work with athletes and perhaps colleagues as well. We will actually stay on the other people part here, but more so in terms of what they need to do for you, because the other implication, I think, around how we can manage your trait-based coach behaviour is actually, don't concede that your situation is as good as it can ever be, and just think it's just about how you cope, because that's one caveat with mental skills, is that they are often coping mechanisms. Okay, in some way, there is still a need for organizational change, and your surrounding environment should be supporting you. So again, as a coach, are you reflecting on actually the situational influences on your behavior that they can't be as easily explained by across a longer term? Maybe you wouldn't include as being biographical in the previous case, but actually is more an immediate issue or feeling that you have, that things aren't being set up in a way that is conducive to showing the best version of you because of how it plays on your emotions, or so on and so forth, sort of your motivation. So that's where there's a need to consider, well, how's your club or organization supporting you? Can you even talk to them, and can you collaboratively try to work as best as can be managed, and for what can be managed externally to put you in a better place? So that is another thing for how you can take that forward. So now in terms of, we've kind of came full circle with this, what was the whole point of this conversation, I suppose, just to summarize? I think it's about understanding that we do need to care more about the you related factors that influence behaviors and outcomes in coaching, and understand that you are a multifaceted, complicated human being, that you have a biography, you have a history, you have a past, and you also have a present. And I think it is important that we can compartmentalize, at least in order to make things intelligible for ourselves, if we're new to maybe trying to pick these things apart in order to make sense of them. But we have to do so in a way that always respects the reality that your biographical you is influenced by the present you, that your trait-based behaviors interact with states, and over time your states can become the traits to some degree within the sort of socially learned triggers that we can come to inhabit. So again, we need to just never try not to separate. Do so as much as you need to in order to start to think through these things about the you related factors for your behavior, but also understand at all times that you are part of an environment. So while we fix you, we also need to fix our environment, and these things must go together. So hopefully that's been useful. Hopefully that's maybe got you thinking about a few things and might contribute to your learning. As always, if you do start to feel that you've been impacted by the show and by some of what I've been saying, there is a little MS form link that's in the shows about show notes. So in the main section of the show, wherever you're listening, you'll see a little link that you can click to give me feedback on how it's impacting your practice and thoughts. Please do that, guys. I'd love that. Reach out to me, even though, again, as I'm saying, even though I'm taking a break from social media at the moment, you can still visit my website. You can also sort of find out how you can get in touch with me. There's a contact section on that. If there isn't, also actually an email within for the show as well within the show notes too. Loads of different ways. So hopefully that was helpful, everyone. And yeah, I will see you next time.